And starting officially. Hello, welcome everybody to today's webinar, Risk Management and Surety Bonds Learning Lab Preview. Today's webinar is being presented by Kirk Buffington. And if at any time during the webinar you need any technical support, my name is Jeff. You can find me in the chat panel down at the bottom. If you click the blue box, you can select my name and send me any technical questions you have about your audio connection to Zoom, those fun things. Otherwise, keep it selected to everyone, and everyone will see the comments and questions that you have in the chat. With that, Kirk, would you like to get us started?
Certainly. Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be presenting this Learning Lab series for the second time. We developed this, NIGP and I developed this last year and had some really good participation and some great attendance. So much so that NIGP said, "Hey, Kirk, we know you're not doing anything else because you're retired. How about you do it again?" So I am excited to be doing it again, and I've made some changes. I've added different content from what we talked about last year, and I think it's content that will be more relevant than what we had last year. Why am I doing this? I think people would ask why should we come to this Learning Lab series? And a couple of things that I found. Although I am retired, I still teach, obviously, and I still do some consulting. One of the things I found is a lot of agencies do not have professional risk management on board. They either outsource it to a broker or agent who advises them on an as-needed basis, which is okay if you get pretty good response, or they don't have any risk management support at all. Or it resides in human resources, and the human resources director is also the risk manager. And risk management is a critical part of any organization, and understanding how important that program is important to protecting your agency. So with that and the great interest that there was 2 years ago when I did a Surety lab or a Surety presentation at Forum in Louisville, over 200, standing room only, that precipitated the interest in this lab. So this will be a short webinar. I'll go through the topics that we'll be discussing. All of the times are the same. There's 6 labs, as you can see on the screen. All start at 3 and go to 5. So we're consistent across the board with time, and they are all going to be in May. And as you can see, we start May 6th, and go right through the month to get to the end of the lab. So I think it's logistically comfortable for most people to put aside that same time every week or twice a week on a couple of occasions. So there are 6 2-hour labs, and it's going to be the first couple of labs we'll talk about risk management and what it is and what it means, outside of us just saying, well, I put in a clause for liquidated damages and I put in an insurance clause. I mean, there's so much more to assessing and mitigating risk than putting a few clauses into a contract. So we'll talk about throughout the 6 labs, we're going to talk about why this is important. We're going to talk about the effects that the pandemic had on not just public procurement, but on the supply chain, and how do we now manage and mitigate those kinds of risks. And the reality is we have risks on the horizon with tariffs and what the economy is going to do over the next year to 2 years. And we have to be prepared to react beforehand. We need to be proactive in how we address these kinds of risks that we're going to have in all of our contracts. So one of the things that I believe very strongly about, and also the academics that I studied with, risk needs to be approached holistically, and that's called ERM. ERM stands for Enterprise Risk Management, all right? And it's the idea of there are not individual silos across the organization, with each silo or each department managing risk on their own. In larger organizations, you have a risk manager, and that risk manager addresses the enterprise, the organization from an enterprise-wide perspective. In smaller organizations, that doesn't necessarily happen. So the first lab in particular is going to be a discussion about ERM, enterprise risk management, what it means, and how, even though you may not have a risk manager, how you may be able to implement some form of it in your organization. So when we talk holistic, I have a couple of graphics that kind of help to kind of illustrate that. You can see hazard risk, operational risk, strategic risk, and financial risk. And we concern ourselves with all of these from a procurement perspective. What are the hazards on a construction project that you need to be aware of and then mitigate for? What are some of the operational risks? Now, we tend to look at risk both from a strategic risk and operational risk. Operational risk is current operations. It's like your operating budget, which is a current fiscal year budget. Operational risk is the same kind of idea. It's risks that may occur in that operational fiscal year period. Okay. Strategic risks are those risks that are either going to occur later in a contract performance or are more long-term effect, such as what happens with the economy and what happens with tariffs. Those are going to be both, when we think about the effect of tariffs, that's going to be operational and strategic. If they are implemented tomorrow, you have an operational risk immediately. If they're implemented and stayed in effect permanently, as has been mentioned by the administration, that becomes a strategic risk. You respond to operational and strategic risks in a very different manner. Okay, and we'll talk about that through the labs. And then finally, the financial risk. And risk, in this particular case, financial risk is tied to the risk of increased pricing. All right, so you have a financial risk that is both strategic and operational. So the idea is to see all of these holistically and respond to them, mitigate them holistically. If you're familiar with SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I also advocate for doing a SWOT analysis. If you're going to take an opportunity to build an ERM, even in a small, a small footprint, if you will, you're going to take that opportunity to build an ERM, an enterprise risk management program, a SWOT analysis where you look at this, you look at a contract. What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? What are the opportunities and what are the threats? And you look at in that manner, you may very well see and identify risks that you may not have even thought of. And as I said, we tend to look at risk in both the strategic and the operational perspective, medium, long-term goal, the day-to-day, the operational budget, your fiscal year period. All right, but it is critical that you take the time to identify, address, identify, and mitigate. All right, there's a four-step process that we'll learn about that goes into risk identification and risk mitigation. So what we try to do once we identify those risks, we assess those risks, which prepares us to both allocate the risk and to mitigate the risk. And allocation and mitigation go hand in hand. Allocation is simply the idea of shifting risk. We allocate or shift risk through insurance. We allocate and shift risk when we make the determination to do a construction manager at risk contract, which shifts a lot of the risk over to your contractor supplier side. Okay. Other areas of risk besides the financial that we've talked about, there's always a risk of poor performance, delays, and disputes. Identifying those and determining what is the probability, and we'll talk about probability. Risk is about probability. What is the probability of something happening? 20%, 30%? In big contracts, you need to take the time to assess the probability of a particular issue happening. I live in South Florida, lived in South Florida almost my entire life, done all of my public contracting in South Florida. So obviously, one of our high probable risks is hurricanes. November, June to November, June 1, November 30th. That's our hurricane season. So we look at that period of time and what is the risk and how will we mitigate that risk, especially construction projects. You've got a construction project and there's a hurricane coming at you, a Cat 3 or Cat 4 hurricane. You've got to, get the cranes down, that kind of thing. So knowing the risk and then also having an idea of the probability of that risk occurring is a very important part of the process. So lab 1, which is the introduction and discussion of enterprise risk management and what it means for organizations, particularly those who may not have the risk manager and want to at least get a better understanding of how to manage risk. All right. We'll talk about the 6 categories of risk that are part of risk assessment and how we can use those and understand them and work them. One of those is what's called a risk register. A risk register is a registry of the risks that you developed, maybe during the SWOT analysis that you did collaboratively with your end users and your client departments. And you develop that comprehensive risk register for a particular contract. That then feeds up the chain to overall risk within the organization. Lab 2 is about insurance regulation. And I think I did this last year, so I left it in. I think it's important for procurement folks to at least have a little bit of understanding of how the insurance market works, who regulates it, how it's regulated, how you can find out whether or not an insurance company or a surety is or having current issues is the potential of insolvency. I was very fortunate the whole time I worked at the City of Fort Lauderdale. We had a full-time risk manager. He's a very good risk manager. He taught me a lot of what I understand today about risk management. But understanding where to find out if you don't have a risk manager that knows where to go, what website can you go to figure out whether or not an insurance company is on good footing. So we'll talk about that. But because of that, I think it's important to have that core understanding of insurance regulation. Lab 3 is about the process, about defining risk, the types of risks that we have in contracting, allocation methods, mitigation methods, assessments. It should be always a full circle, 360 degrees, that you always come around to reviewing what you did. Was your risk registry pretty comprehensive? Were your determinations of probability relatively accurate? So there should always be a continual ongoing review of the actions that you have taken. Lab 4 gets into what a lot of people really come to these presentations, this lab series, and when I've done this at forum. If I recall correctly, last year, Lab 4 and Lab 5 were the most attended uh, presentations because Lab 4 is the introduction to bonds and sureties. And we'll get into, and then Lab 5 is a deeper dive into bonds, bid bonds, payment bonds. And you'll hear my discussion. We will discuss, when is a bid bond a good idea? When is a bid bond the only bid security that should be acceptable? And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the pitfalls or the pros and cons of certified checks, cash, letters of credit, as being used for bid security. Okay, so that's Lab 4 and 5. Bids, bonds, and sureties. We'll spend it's a very popular topic, and I think you'll get a lot of information out of this that you can immediately use back in your agency. And then finally, this is where I made most of the comprehensive changes. Last year, Lab 6 was about underwriting bond. How does a bond get underwritten? When you ask for a payment and performance bond, what is the surety doing? I found it interesting, but I think given where we're at, I think cybersecurity is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about not only cybersecurity, cyber insurance, but I'm going to talk about threat vectors and what we can do in procurement. What can we do in our little office to help mitigate the constant threats that we're getting, cyber threats that we get multiple times on an ongoing basis at our laptops, on our text messages, all voicemails, all of those vectors that are used to try to come in and steal money or any other number of things that the bad actors will try to do. And that actually is the introduction and a preview of what you can learn if you choose to attend any number or any or all of the labs in May. With that, any questions out there that you might want to pose now? Right now, I see in the chat, I see a lot of hellos from everybody, and that's great. Hello to everybody out there. I see a lot of people from Florida. So if we can sign up for all classes but miss one, can it be assessed by recording later? Jeff, I'll let you answer that. I don't want to misspeak.
If you paid for and registered for that particular session beforehand, the recordings they won't be distributed, but for certain cases where someone has to miss one because of an emergency, uh, that can be shared with you. But there's excuse me, a time limit on watching it, I believe. Um, I'll just say 30 days to be safe.
Okay. Will we get notification for these classes in our emails? Jeff? They'll get a webinar notice, won't they?
Yes, if you're signed up for the sessions, you should get all of the typical notifications and reminders of sessions that you would get if you signed up for any webinar or course.
We have a conflict on one of the dates with FAPO conference. I understand that because I'll be at FAPO also, but I'm not doing one of my two presentations at FAPO when I'm doing this. I guess you could, however you do that, I mean, I'll leave that up to you. You can sign up and If you miss it, you miss it, and maybe you can get the recording. Or I'm not sure which one I'm doing. Is that May? I'll have to check my calendar to see which one I'm doing at FAPO.
Ryan, regarding the lab dates, I put a link into the chat that takes you to the Learning Lab page, this particular Learning Lab, and has all the dates and other information there.
So at FAPO, if you're at FAPO Monday, I am doing a session on CCNA. And Tuesday, I am doing actually a session on cyber insurance for FAPO conference. Um, so I'm also, that lab that I'm doing for the lab series is lab 2 on that day. And that's insurance regulation. If that helps anybody. Are all of the labs in the NIGP forum? I'm not if you're asking will the labs be presented at forum, no, they will not be. Is the cost for this on NIGP? I don't think so, but I'll let Jeff answer that.
Yes, just
Sorry.
added a link into the chat, and it lists each of the lab sessions there. And then when you click on each of the labs, if there's a specific one or all that you want to register, you do pay per session, and the pricing per session is there, which is $89, not cents. Don't get too excited there.
Yes, I will talk about cyber liability and I will talk about errors in admissions. Will you go over the bonds and how to call bonds if necessary? Yes, I have a whole set of 10 slides about calling the bonds because that seems to be what's missing when people talk about bonds. So yes, I will cover that. Jeff, do you know the answer to that question about applicable to specializations or certificates?
That I do not.
Are they?
Which is not satisfying, right, Christine? I'm copying your name down and we'll take this to the team and respond as soon as I get an answer.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, again, I very much appreciate your time. I look forward to at least hoping to see some of you, or I don't see you actually in these webinars. So looking forward to hopefully you being present in these sessions. And as I said earlier, I desire and hope that I always give you takeaways that you can take back and do something with at your own agency. Can you, yeah, I think you can just sign up for, yeah, Jeff answered that. Well, thank you, Tasha. I look forward to it. Okay. Well, thank you all. And we good, Jeff, I think?
Yes.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you, Karen. And that is all. The recording of this webinar will be sent out later today.
All right.
With that, make it a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.